Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight at our September program, focusing on literacy and the science of reading. Part of our mission at the New York Book Forum is to promote literacy by facilitating educational opportunities about literacy. We believe that literacy is fundamental to the livelihood of the publishing industry and affects creators and producers alike. In March, we hosted our Lapse in Literacy event, which many of you were there for, where we spoke about many facets surrounding the issue of literacy and the many different approaches that can be taken to address it. Tonight, we have a guest speaker from the Waterford Organization, a nonprofit organization engaged in utilizing educational tools to deliver improved education for children. Tonight, Allison Molkenthin from Waterford and I have a wonderful conversation to introduce you to the topic of the science of reading. Before we get to that, Chuck Jackson from Lakeside Book Printing is also with us today in the audience. Chuck, can you give us a few words about your connection to Waterford?
Oh, thank you. How's this working now?
Is it no?
How's this working
there we go.
now? All right. Good evening. My name is Chuck Jackson. I recently retired after a 36-year career at the original R.R. Donnelly & Sons, now the Lakeside Book Company. And I'd like to provide some context on the topic for this evening. By the way, I started when I was 12. Much of the business development work that I've managed during the last 10 years or so has involved helping educational technology companies, I would call that a segment within the book publishing market called EdTech, with book manufacturing, warehousing, and logistics services. And as an aside, this segment has grown dramatically and probably represents billions of dollars of sales from all the publishers that are involved in it. Many of these companies are involved in new and creative approaches to curriculum. And while I was onboarding one of these accounts, I learned about their focus on phonics as a critical element in literacy instruction. And serendipitously, Allison and her husband Steve and my wife and I were having dinner. We're friends from Darien and fellow congregants at the Episcopal Church there. She shared her literacy work with Waterford, and I then suggested to New York Book Forum board member Mel Cowley, who's one of my colleagues, that the forum consider including Allison in an upcoming meeting, and that it might be aligned with your ongoing literacy efforts. So here we are. Thanks to Irene for all of her efforts in organizing, and thanks Allison for joining us. So I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Chuck, for making this connection. So tonight we have Allison here with us, so we'll start into our program. Tonight's program is about the science of reading. Allison from the Waterford Organization has kindly joined us today. We're very excited to hear from her and her experience working in this organization and her experience with literacy. So can you start off by telling us what brought you to Waterford?
Sure. Can you hear? No.
Is this okay? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Irene. And thank you, Chuck, and thank you to the New York Book Forum. I'm really happy to be here. And I'm loving learning about all of your work. I also know there's a million events in New York City tonight. Somebody said David Brooks is speaking at the 92nd Street Y, and the Second Gentleman is in Brooklyn. So really, thank you. And Chuck left off the part that I dragged him to my documentary movie, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So I was introduced to Waterford 22 years ago in November by an existing board member, and they were looking for sort of some new blood. And I was interviewed for a year by the founder, and he was an incredible visionary. He was the head of the Spence School in New York for 10 years, and in that role saw that even though we know how children learn to read, we've known for decades, that about 1 in 4 children struggle to learn to read. They learn at different cadence, they need help. And he saw, even in a privileged private New York City school, that the teachers really didn't have the time to give each child the individualized attention that they needed to learn. And so he left Spence, and this was the 70s. This was Intel was announcing that they'd be doubling the memory on a chip every 18 months, and technology was kind of popping out all over. He left and he raised $100 million and went public to have a company to do technology and education. He quickly realized, however, that he needed to go younger, to younger children, and also be a nonprofit. So he took his stake, he sold his stake and started Waterford 47 years ago. So at that time, he hired, there weren't too many software programmers around back then, the best and the brightest in software programming and technology, and brought in, at least as consultants, all the experts in education, some in the Department of Ed, some global, in terms of trying to build an adaptive program that would give any child the opportunity to learn to read and math science in a proven way, using science, everything evidence-based and data-driven. And he developed this adaptive program so that he could work towards equity in education, so that any child could have this learning opportunity. And so he was very successful. At that time, the focus was read by third grade, right? So we all know you don't learn to read in 1 year, it's sort of a trajectory. So Waterford's program was kindergarten, first and second grade, with the understanding that if someone did that program, with the adaptive learning going at the child's own pace, if they didn't get it sort of working around, but always making sure that they got the fundamentals before moving along, kids would be reading by third grade. And so it was really wonderful. I was completely drawn into the vision and joined the board. It's funny because my first board meeting, I always know exactly how long I've on the board. I've been on the board because I was delivering my third child. And so in the first board meeting that I was officially on the board but not there, they named me audit chair, where I was for 17 years. I then chaired it for 3 years, which was tough through COVID. And we're pretty large. We're in about 43 states and have about 400 employees. And then a year ago, I stepped out of the chair and back onto the board. So I saw Dusty Houston's vision and I just was all in. Like the fact that our education system was failing so many children. And this, as I say, this is 47 years ago that he realized that. And we had 6 board meetings a year, and every one he would spend updating us on all the latest research, the brain research, the early childhood research, the school research, the cycles of school methods. And he talked a lot about the science of reading and how we have to use evidence-based programs, and that the schools were just using things that didn't work. So then some of you probably know Waterford has a Pearson product. We did have an exclusive license with Pearson for 17 years. So the market, and some of you may have known people who did it as a kid in school. The market knew it often as Pearson or as Dusty and Rosie, which are the characters. And then about 15 years ago, which is about when we walked away from Pearson to build our own sales force, the brain research came out saying that kindergarten was too late. So we had built our whole program on read by third grade and started kindergarten. And then kindergarten was too late, and basically other studies, does it sound okay?
Yes.
Other studies start to be able to tie the negative outcomes like teen pregnancy that had been tied to if you can't read by third grade to if you're not kindergarten ready. And now today, almost half the kids in this nation are not kindergarten ready. So we wonder why we have these horrible literacy rates in third and fourth grade. But we know the data show that if they're not kindergarten ready, they probably won't be reading by third grade. So about 15 years ago, 17 years ago, the brain research confirmed that, and we said, oh no, we're too late. What are we gonna do? And we didn't just reverse engineer what we had for kindergarten for 4-year-olds, because kids at that age learn differently. So we were lucky to get, I think, about $8 million to rebuild the whole product. Obviously, we had a lot of knowledge already about how a 4-year-old learns, what they should be learning, in what order, in what pace, even how their little hands move on a mouse, and with a lot of research about how long they should do it every day. So actually the founder's son, Dr. Benjamin Houston, did his PhD on dose response, like a pharmaceutical company. What's too little, what's too much, what's just right. And we had a lot of input from like the American Academy of Pediatricians and things like that on screen time. So the program was designed for 4-year-olds to be 15 minutes a day of pre-literacy and then 15 minutes of science math, with the understanding that a 4-year-old, 30 minutes is kind of their ideal window of focusing on one thing. And today I talk to kindergarten teachers and they say that the things they see 4-year-olds arriving at that they're missing most are phonics and being able to do something for 30 minutes. So it's still around. So anyway, it's been a great journey. I've become, such an advocate. I care a lot about this topic, and it's just something that we can do better as a nation. So that's a long answer, but.
Yes, no, thank you for that. That's incredible that, by 3rd grade, so here in America, I think the national test for, reading, I remember taking this when I was in 3rd grade, that's when they test, your reading ability. But by then, when you're taking that test at 8 years old in 3rd grade, it's already too late. So it almost seems like that test is happening too late for us to catch this even. We should be looking at kindergarten readiness because it's a huge indicator, like you said. And a test by 3rd grade just isn't capturing that picture. It's just telling us how bad that picture is, but it's not telling us what can you do? Why did we get here? But that's also incredible about the specific details of how much screen. I didn't know that 15 minutes is 15 to 30 minutes is the sweet spot. That's good to know. I'll knock my niece and nephew off with the iPad next time after 15, 30 minutes, and I'll tell them the research shows you don't need this anymore. So you were the initial executive producer of the science reading. What drew you to that? And if you haven't seen this, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's a documentary about this topic here. So tell us what drew you to
And I think there's a link in your handout.
Yes.
And it's now available on Amazon and Apple TV, and it's $3.99, but I don't get any of it, so enjoy. So I was actually in a Waterford board meeting and feeling so frustrated that we had a solution, we had a product that worked, we had incredible data, we're in the US government, What Works Clearinghouse, we've had third-party studies done, and it works. If a kid does it 15 minutes a day, they're reading, honestly, they're going into kindergarten at almost the 1st grade reading level. So, but people don't know. People don't know how bad we are in this country at kindergarten readiness, and schools are not using evidence-based materials. So how can we spread this word? And we were in Utah. I had just been at Sundance at some films, and I was like, a documentary. We have to do a documentary. So thankfully the chairman at the time who preceded me said, no, we don't, but you can, which he was right. So they're 2 separate things, the movie The Right to Read and Waterford, but there's a lot of connections. The main one is me, and I was fortunate to bring in a few big funders and raise the first couple $100,000, and use some of the Waterford families that were using our program are in the film. Some of the experts we sourced, and the founder of Waterford's son, Dr. Benjamin Houston, is one of the experts who speaks in it. But initially, honestly, we started out with a focus on kindergarten readiness, and it actually even had a different name. But as we did the research and tried to find, how we share the story with people so it really resonates, we kept coming across the science of reading and how even if you do a great job with a 4-year-old, if they get to school in kindergarten and they're not taught in a proven way that works, they're not going to continue to make progress. And so at that point, it was pretty much launched, and really the director, took it from there with the team. And I don't know if anyone, I know my crew has seen it, but it's really quite compelling as a social justice issue. As Kareem says, he's the protagonist in the movie. He works at the NWACP on education. What good is it to be able to sit at the counter if you can't read the menu? And reading, we learn to read, and then we read to learn. So if we want to talk about civic engagement, other types of literacy, financial literacy, we have to address the issue of literacy. So anyway, it's a movie we came out about a year and a half ago at the Santa Barbara Film Festival, International Film Festival, and we were really lucky to have LeVar Burton join as executive producer, so he helped us get a lot of exposure and joined us at the first film festival, and we've done a lot of community screenings, and as I say now, it's widely available, so I hope you'll all see it and share it because I think it encapsulates the problem with a lot of statistics and numbers and helps to show how deep this problem is.
I love what you said about there's no point in sitting at the counter if you can't read the menu. I think that encapsulates that's a great quote. Okay. So I think a lot of, when I started working with you on this, my understanding of the science of reading was very basic and not very accurate either. It was like my understanding of it was it's phonics, but it's not. There's more to that, and I'm so grateful I was able to work with you on this because it really expanded my understanding about it. So I like to describe briefly for the audience here, if you're not familiar with the science of reading, what the pillars of the science of reading are. So I've come to this understanding through my work, Allison. So here, so on the screen, I've made a little, bullet point, maybe a little bit too small. But so, as I understand it, the pillars of the science of reading are phonetics, so it's sounds of letters in the language. It's understanding that this letter, A makes it sound like ah, and B sound like ba, and putting these letters together makes it sound like ba. And then it's phonics, which is putting these sounds of the letters all together and how they create words. And then practicing that over and over again creates fluency, which then helps you build vocabulary. Because if you don't know how these words sound, then you're constantly stumbling over them, and it's difficult to build that vocabulary. And when you build more vocabulary, you start building comprehension. So that's the fundamentals of the science of reading. So this is the process, but I understand there's a whole science behind it. So it's not just about the process, it's also about how it affects our brains. And you touched on that a little bit in your first answer. Can you go into that a little bit more? Can you describe for us how this affects our brains?
Yes, it's so important, and I think now that there's a lot of talk about the science of reading, people do basically equate it with phonics, and that alone does the trick because a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I want start to be able to tie the negative outcomes like teen pregnancy that had been tied to if you can't read by 3rd grade to if you're not kindergarten ready. And now today, almost half the kids in this nation are not kindergarten ready. So we wonder why we have these horrible literacy rates in 3rd and 4th grade. But we know the data show that if they're not kindergarten ready, they probably won't be reading by 3rd grade. So about 15 years ago, 17 years ago, the brain research confirmed that, and we said, oh no, we're too late. What are we gonna do? And we didn't just reverse engineer what we had for kindergarten for 4-year-olds because kids at that age learn differently. So we were lucky to get, I think, about $8 million to rebuild the whole product. Obviously, we had a lot of knowledge already about how a 4-year-old learns, what they should be learning, in what order, in what pace, even how their little hands move on a mouse, and with a lot of research about how long they should do it every day. So actually the founder's son, Dr. Benjamin Houston, did his PhD on dose response, like a pharmaceutical company. What's too little, what's too much, what's just right. And we had a lot of input from like the American Academy of Pediatricians and things like that on screen time. So the program was designed for 4-year-olds to be 15 minutes a day of pre-literacy and then 15 minutes of science math, with the understanding that a 4-year-old 30 minutes is kind of their ideal window of focusing on one thing. And today I talk to kindergarten teachers and they say that the things they see 4-year-olds arriving at that they're missing most are phonics and being able to do something for 30 minutes. So it's still around. So anyway, it's been a great journey. I've become, such an advocate. I care a lot about this topic, and it's just something that we can do better as a nation. So that's a long answer, but.
Yes, thank you for that. That's incredible that, by 3rd grade, so here in America, I think the national test for reading, I remember taking this when I was in 3rd grade. That's when they test your reading ability. But by then, when you're taking that test at 8 years old in 3rd grade, it's already too late. So it almost seems like that test is happening too late for us to catch this even. We should be looking at kindergarten readiness because it's a huge indicator, like you said. And a test by 3rd grade just isn't capturing that picture. It's just telling us how bad that picture is, but it's not telling us what can you do? Why did we get here? But that's also incredible about the specific details of how much screen. I didn't know that 15 minutes is 15 to 30 minutes is the sweet spot. That's good to know. I'll knock my niece and nephew off with the iPad next time after 15, 30 minutes, and I'll tell them the research shows you don't need this anymore. So can you so you were the initial executive producer of the Science of Reading. What drew you to that? And if you haven't seen this, it's fantastic. It's a documentary about this topic here. So tell us what drew you to
And I think there's a link in your handout.
Yes.
And it's now available on Amazon and Apple TV, and it's $3.99, but I don't get any of it, so enjoy. So I was actually in a Waterford board meeting and feeling so frustrated that we had a solution, we had a product that worked, we had incredible data, we're in the US government, What Works Clearinghouse, we've had third-party studies done, and it works. If a kid does it 15 minutes a day, they're reading, honestly, they're going into kindergarten at almost the 1st grade reading level. So, but people don't know. People don't know how bad we are in this country at kindergarten readiness, and schools are not using evidence-based materials. So how can we spread this word? And we were in Utah. I had just been at Sundance at some films, and I was like, a documentary. We have to do a documentary. So thankfully the chairman at the time who preceded me said, no, we don't, but you can, which he was right. So they're 2 separate things, the movie The Right to Read and Waterford, but there's a lot of connections. The main one is me, and I was fortunate to bring in a few big funders and raise the first couple $100,000, and use some of the Waterford families that were using our program are in the film. Some of the experts we sourced, and the founder of Waterford's son, Dr. Benjamin Houston, is one of the experts who speaks in it. But initially, honestly, we started out with a focus on kindergarten readiness, and it actually even had a different name. But as we did the research and tried to find, how we share the story with people so it really resonates, we kept coming across the science of reading, and how even if you do a great job with a 4-year-old, if they get to school in kindergarten and they're not taught in a proven way that works, they're not going to continue to make progress. And so at that point, it was pretty much launched, and really the director, took it from there with the team. And I don't know if anyone, I know my my crew has seen it, but it's really quite compelling as a social justice issue. As Kareem says, he's the protagonist in the movie. He works at the NAACP on education. What good is it to be able to sit at the counter if you can't read the menu? And reading, we learn to read, and then we read to learn. So if we want to talk about civic engagement, other types of literacy, financial literacy, we have to address the issue of literacy. So anyway, it's a movie. We came out about a year and a half ago at the Santa Barbara Film Festival, International Film Festival, and we were really lucky to have LeVar Burton join as executive producer, so he helped us get a lot of exposure, and joined us at the first film festival, and we've done a lot of community screenings, and as I say, now it's widely available, so I hope you'll all see it and share it, because I think it encapsulates the problem with a lot of statistics and numbers, and helps to show how deep this problem is.
I love what you said about there's no point in sitting at the counter if you can't read the menu. I think that encapsulates that's a great quote. Okay. So I think a lot of, when I started working with you on this, my understanding of the science of reading was very basic and not very accurate either. It was like my understanding of it was it's phonics. but it's not. There's more to that, and I'm so grateful I was able to work with you on this because it really expanded my understanding about it. So I like to describe briefly for the audience here, if you're not familiar with the science of reading, what the pillars of the science of reading are. So I've come to this understanding through my work, Allison. So here, so on the screen, I've made a little, bullet point, maybe a little bit too small. But so, as I understand it, the pillars of the science of reading are phonetics, so it's sounds of letters in the language. It's understanding that this letter, A makes it sound like ah, and B sound like ba, and putting these letters together makes it sound like ba. And then it's phonics, which is putting these sounds of the letters all together and how they create words. And then practicing that over and over again creates fluency, which then helps you build vocabulary. Because if you don't know how these words sound, then you're constantly stumbling over them, and it's difficult to build that vocabulary. And when you build more vocabulary, you start building comprehension. So that's the fundamentals of the science of reading. So this is the process, but I understand there's a whole science behind it. So it's not just about the process, it's also about how it affects our brains. And you touched on that a little bit in your first answer. Can you go into that a little bit more? Can you describe for us how this affects our brains?
Yes, it's so important, and I think now that there's a lot of talk about the science of reading, people do basically equate it with phonics, and that alone does the trick, because a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I like
teach that to their students. How can we bring it into the classroom? So can you tell us a little bit, what are some of the struggles that you have heard with educators? Like, what are things that they struggle with most, like resources and whatnot?
Well, I think some of your other forums have talked about the many struggles that teachers and school systems have, but I think we hear, mostly that they struggle with time, the time in the day to do everything that they need, and being able to do it well, and money, funding for the right curriculum, for the right tools, for teacher training, professional development. And so legislation really helps when it then means that there's funding available for teachers to be supported. And I think as Waterford.org, we're seeing a lot of requests for professional development. I think a lot of the publishing companies also have, and ed tech companies, as Chuck mentioned, have a lot of professional development because you have to learn how to use the tools, right? And teachers need a lot of support. And I think, unfortunately, the rising of awareness about the science of reading has meant that a lot of teachers and administrators have felt sort of shame and blame and are sort of like, I didn't know, and so I think raising awareness and providing the tools, and it's not like they haven't been around. I think, I live in Connecticut, I think when our legislation was passed, schools were directed to use one of 7 curricula. And so a lot of them already had one that was evidence-based, or 2 or 3. A lot of them were already using, but maybe not focusing on the parts they needed to. So this is not new data. The data's been around for at least 35 years, and there's been, we call them the reading wars, really since I think 1920. So it's not new, but I think what happens often in education is cycles, and this one we just know the data now. We know the facts. So hopefully, I'm really hopeful that this time we'll get it right.
So, speaking about, I'm sure the shame that educators might feel, the shame and the blame, that makes it difficult for this message to really penetrate. And you've been advocating for this, for science of reading, in the literacy sphere for a long time. So what are some of the barriers that advocates such as yourself have seen in efforts to increase awareness about the science of reading, in connection, and so what are some of the barriers you have?
Yeah, I think I mentioned funding, and I think I like to sort of flip the question because, people say, well, what can we do? And I think we need to look at early childhood education, and in fact, even early childhood child care as investments, right? If you look, I'm a finance person, so way down. If you look at the ROI, the return on investment, of early childhood learning. And as I say, it even applies to childcare, right? If kids have childcare, then mom or dad or grandma, whoever's the caregiver, can get a job, can make income, has more spending, it's good for the economy. Similarly, we know from government studies and many others that the investment in children early is really great. It makes sense, right? If you have a kid that goes to kindergarten ready and gets sat at the smart table and loves school and learns to read and helps his or her friends, that child's gonna love school and they're gonna love learning. And obviously the contrary is a struggle. And if that child succeeds, that's gonna be way less expensive than 8th grade tutoring or job training or adult literacy. So we know that, that's not news either. Unfortunately, a lot of legislators say, yes, 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 we care about little kids, and then they have to also fill potholes, or the many other things that we need to spend money on. But I think bringing in a more analytical discussion to early childhood and early childhood learning, and how we have to, as a society, make this work and support teachers in schools and pre-K programs so the kids are kindergarten ready, is really important, because we can sort of shift it and it does make financial sense.
I want to bring this back just a little bit. You had touched on this in the beginning about kindergarten readiness and literacy. So you had mentioned before, children being kindergarten ready is a huge indicator of them, of literacy. So by the time they have that test at 3rd grade, they're going to score way better. But there's also other more far-reaching implications that you had kind of touched on into adulthood and later on. Can you speak a little about that?
Well, I think as you say, a lot of the data that used to show the negative outcomes of children not being able to read by 3rd grade, now they can tie to kindergarten readiness. And basically they're saying if a child's not kindergarten ready, they won't be reading by 3rd grade. And then, I mean, the rest, as you said, we learn to read and then we read to learn. If you're not reading in 3rd or 4th grade, then social studies is hard, math is hard. I mean, everything's hard. Getting the bus schedule is hard.
Right.
And so then, that affects everything in life. And confidence, I want to bring in mental health to it, but confidence is a big factor in mental health. And if kids are struggling, they're not going to be confident. They're not going to be confident in school, and it's hard to be confident elsewhere.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think mental health is a huge part of literacy. I mean, even like thinking of myself, like reading did give me, I don't want to say confidence, but it certainly helps to build your empathy. Studies have shown that reading builds empathy, and because you're taking in experiences that are not just your own personal experiences for your own environment, but you're reading about other people's experiences. Your world really grows. And that's a scholastic phrase that I just accidentally did. But absolutely, mental health. Absolutely, mental health ties into literacy, and I think these. We're talking about return on investment here, but I think these are the things that also, it's hard to capture data like this. It's hard to capture how does literacy help our mental health as a community, as a society. But I think there is no doubt that literacy can improve mental health, or can fortify mental health. Anyways, we've gotten a little off track on that question, but basically, I think the return on investment is absolutely incredible, and it's not just, it costs more to help a child who is struggling with literacy. There's just way more farther reaching implications of job readiness and employment, things like that. So can you tell us how many kids have books at home?
This is such a hard question also. A lot of book orgs and nonprofits use a stat from a very old Department of Ed report that said 2/3 of kids don't have books. But I think right now, honestly, thanks to so many great organizations giving books to children, it's now about 1 in 5 that children that do not have their own book, which even that is shocking, right? 20% of kids, it's horrifying. And the data on kids with books is mind-blowing, so thank you to all of you publishers. I think, I've seen studies that say that a child with books at home, so they're not talking about one book, but, a library of books at home, for those children, that is a bigger factor than parents' income or parents' education level, which, that's something that just blew my mind. But it makes sense, right? If children learn to love books and have them and read them and enjoy the stories. So I think that's something many organizations are doing better on, working on. It's just we have to do so many things. Children have to learn to read, and they need access to books, and many books.
Yes, I totally agree with that. I didn't have that many books at home when I was a kid. So, we went to the library, so my mother and I would go to the library every weekend, and that's how I had my books at home. And I remember, the first book of mine, children's book that I had at home, I got through a free program at school, Reach Out and Read program, which is still a program that exists today. And that was my first book. That was my first 2 books. So you got not just 1 book, you got 2 books to take home for free. And I was really excited, and I read that book cover to cover, over and over again, and it, fell apart to pieces, as it should, because I read it so much.
What was the book?
It was Charlotte's Web.
That's a good one.
Yeah, still my favorite. But so yes, absolutely, kids having books at home makes a huge difference. And if a child doesn't have books at home, what are your thoughts on, because their community resources too? I think the library was a great resource that my family had. Very fortunately, we grew up in a community with a great library system. Brooklyn Public Library, phenomenal library system, depending on the branch that you're located near. The branch that I was near, Highland Branch, it had a great children's section.
Yeah, as I say, I think that's, of course, libraries, right? But that takes a parent or a caregiver, the ability and willingness and knowledge to go, to know that it's important. Language is also an issue. We know at Waterford, there's a lot of research, we call it windows and mirrors, that if children can't see themselves in the literature and the textbooks, they don't learn as well. Or the reverse, if they do, they learn better. So diverse books in different languages and with different types of characters and stories are really important. And I love that I'm seeing more publishers produce more books like that. And I think, as you say, there's many organizations now that have realized this and that are getting books to kids. So I do a lot of work in Norwalk, Connecticut. There's probably 5 organizations, and they're at every fair, and there's a bookmobile, and they're really working hard to get books in the hands of kids and let the kids shop for the books, pick out their own. So I think we're doing better on that, but we still have ways to go.
Yeah, there are definitely, leagues to go on that, but I definitely think we're making progress on diverse books today. Even looking at children's book lists today, there are way more books for, children of every background. So one of the things that I look at is, what kind of books are relevant for Asian Americans, being Asian American. And when I look at the children's book list today, there's so much more. And I love them, because when I was growing up, I don't remember seeing that many. And it's exciting, even as an adult, to see them. And I read them, even though, obviously I'm past that literacy, that reading level. But I still enjoy reading them, because it's nice to see, someone that's young today, what variety do they have, and how wonderful that they have more than what I had. For sure. So I'm going to ask an ending question here. So where would you like the state of literacy to be in the United States in the next 10 years?
Oh, I love that question. You still good here?
Oh, maybe it's...
I put back. Oh, there.
Just went back. Irene. I think, because of a lot of ed tech companies, actually, technology and accessibility have improved, and in terms of how kids learn, what they need to learn. I think of my oldest daughter spent a semester in Spain when she was 15 in 10th grade, and she had to still make up the math and chemistry at home that she missed. And she just did Khan Academy on a really not good internet connection every day for free. Just went in and did the lessons and learned it. So I think with Waterford, we've come across all the barriers, like access, kids having internet at home device. And so for our 4-year program, we actually give families a laptop or a tablet. We'll pay for internet, we'll set it up, we'll send them a satellite connection. And language, we have our websites also in Spanish, the help's available within the program in Spanish, and we have coaches by phone in 135 languages, because we saw that kids' access is so important. So technology can help a lot with access, and I think we're gonna get better because you can do Google Translate, and so those things are improving. But I have high hopes for this country. I mean, we know data says that 98% of people, more or less, can learn to read. And so we're nowhere close. And this is not news, it's not new data. So I really believe that, as Dr. Houston says in my film, it's not can we, right? It's do we have the will? Do we have the will legislatively? Do we have the will funding, dollars-wise? Do we, as a society, prioritize literacy? And that starts with young kids. And unlike homelessness, where they say 1 millionaire could fix it, and I'm not sure, or cancer that we don't have a solution for, we know how the brain learns to read. Like, we know the solution. So what are we doing? So it's a big question. I'm very hopeful. I'm excited. To me, awareness is everything, because so many people don't know. So many people think, oh, don't you just go to kindergarten and then learn? So we make a lot of assumptions, but I think we have to look at the data. We have to look at the data of how bad things are, and we have to look at the data of what is working and is proven to work. Let's use what works, and let's make it happen. So I'm really thankful to be here tonight. I know all of you care about books and reading and literacy, and it's just a really exciting time, because I think we can turn the corner and improve literacy rates in this country. So thank you. Thank you, Irene.
Yeah, I do want to reiterate, like a 20% illiteracy rate in adults, just it seems astounding, because like you just mentioned, 98% of people can read. So how is it possible that we have a 21% illiteracy rate in adults? That's just, it's mind blowing, and it's very sad. When we know that there are things that we can do that can help remedy that. Okay, so I'd like to open up this portion to questions from the, I'm gonna go.
So I'm glad you brought back up the 21% illiteracy rate among adults, because I've been tripping on that ever since you said that. And I wonder, and then the 50% only on a 6th grade reading level. Is there much going on to help those adults learn to read? And is it willingness on their side? What's lacking?
I don't know the answer to that question. However, I do know, and actually it was when we did a screening of our film in Washington, D.C. with a lot of legislators and educators. Dr. Kimona Burke, who's in the film and ran literacy for Mississippi, and now she's at a advisory company, said that it's really hard to get adult tutors. Even within communities, people are like, I learned to read, so why didn't she or he? And young people don't feel comfortable tutoring people older than them. So it's hard. Once someone's an adult, they have to have some willingness or interest or desire. So I think my biggest hope for that question is, let's get kids when they're young so we don't have adults that are illiterate. But I do think when I did the screening in DC, 2 friends who came with me who lived in DC said, I'm going tomorrow to sign up to do adult tutoring. So I think it's something that libraries have it, there's organizations. I think you do something with a homeless organization and books.
Yes. Yeah.
There are organizations that are trying to make a dent, but it's a really tough question.
Yes.
And does Waterford work for adults?
So that's a great question. We sell to schools, kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. For the pre-K program, that's all free to families, and it's either funded federally, by state, by the municipality, or philanthropically. We have to have a child that's a pre-K child to get the program. But once they get it, anyone older, so younger kids could do it, hypothetically. When I joined the board 22 years ago, they sent me a computer, it was like modem dial-up. And my kids weren't exactly the right ages, but they would do it, and the little one would sit on their lap. And my daughter, who's a third-year medical student, still says she learned to round numbers from the Waterford song. So it's super impactful and sustainable.
Do you know the song?
No, I probably did. But no, the great thing is they went and did it, and I cooked dinner. But we call them sibling accounts. But we saw so many, we say caregivers, not parents, because many of the children that use our program, it's grandma who's responsible for them, or an aunt. So many adults were using the kids program, which of course messes up the sequencing because it's adaptive learning. And so we offer sibling accounts for any older sibling or other family member, and we have a family with 10 accounts. So we've seen parents and grandparents learn English or learn to read, helped by our system. So we're trying. Thank you.
So early on in this program, you said how their little fingers move over the mouse. I like paper. I want to talk about books where you turn the pages. I'm not saying the mouse isn't important, I'm not saying there's not ways you can learn to read on a device, but where do you stand on how important it is to have that physical integration of the book as a learning tool as opposed to a screen where there's lots of other distractions?
Great question, and I think we need both. I think what we saw is that kids weren't learning, and as I said, they need the individualized attention, so an adaptive program really helps them. One kid might struggle on the letter K, and one kid might be fine with K, but struggle on M, so that it works with them, with their strengths, and supports them where they're struggling. But I'm with you. I don't even read on a device. I love books. I love the smell of books. And as I said, the books in the home is a huge indicator of school success. So they're both important. I mean, most children won't learn to read just by looking at books. So you really need both, the instruction and the wonderful books. And Waterford as an organization, we used to always send these sets of books. We got away from it because there wasn't as much demand. But still, when I go to a resource fair in the city or something, we have a lot of free books. And they're bilingual, they're in English and Spanish, and people love them. And kids, are so excited to have a book.
Yay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Wow, this was so enlightening. I feel like I'm taking away so much from this talk. First, realizing, and not just today for the first time, like you, Irene, I was privileged to grow up with a great Brooklyn Public Library lending system.
Great.
Yeah, exactly. To have access to books, wow, that gave me an advantage. Secondly, as the parent of a toddler who is 2.5, I find myself constantly asking, am I doing enough? Am I reading enough? And the answer is, of course I am. Well, firstly, I work in publishing, so I've got free access to books. And I actually live in southern Maine now, and sadly, Maine was not on that list of states. And Maine used to have this really great program called Raising Readers. And the description is, we create a love of reading by giving all Maine kids books at birth and well child visits through age 5. That program just got discontinued this past year, which is such a bummer if that was the only way that a child got books. So I know that the Dolly Parton Imagination Library is expanding in Maine, which is great, and another program, I think with a very similar name. But it just makes me think about all those programs that perhaps in other states are also getting cut. And yeah, this is more of like, I guess, a question comment. Like, do you see this happening in other states? And just, you know, even from toddlerhood, I feel like kindergarten ready is gonna be burnt in my brain now. So yeah, it just gives me a lot to think about for prepping my kiddo on being kindergarten ready. So any thoughts from that free verse?
Yeah, I mean, there's programs being cut for sure, and federal funding, as you said, it's so fickle, right? That you think you get it, and then potholes are the priority or whatever it is. And I always explain the early childhood landscape, both in terms of the products and the expertise, as well as the funding, as a patchwork quilt, because the funding sometimes it's municipal, state, federal, foundation, philanthropic, it's just all over the place. And so the poor organizations that work in that space, especially the nonprofits, are just always trying to figure that out. But I do think that, and I think, you know, states legislatively are shifting and trying new things, and there's been a lot of ed tech companies that have come in flashy and look great, and people try them, they haven't always, you know, worked, panned out, or had the evidence. So it's tricky, but for you as a mom, watch our movie, and there's a podcast, I think, did you list it on the sheet?
Yes, it is there.
It's called Sold a Story. It's just, if you don't believe anything I've said, it's completely horrifying. She is an investigative journalist, not a literacy expert. She's also in our film. And she did a podcast on the science of reading. And so it's, you know, it's really an issue, but I think one of the pillars that's really important is vocabulary. And in our film, there's some footage. It's actually a program called Lena, which is also a nonprofit, that's sort of at age 0 to 3. That's really about coaching the parents. The parents wear a little thing around their neck, and it's kind of like a competition, like who mom or dad can say more words.
I'm very competitive. Maybe you should tell me this.
To the child, and you see the mom saying, I'm making spaghetti and I'm boiling the water and it becomes steam. And I just know, my husband's right there, I was like nonstop talk. I mean, I work full time, but with my kids, nonstop talking. It's the best thing that you can do, is just talk to them all the time. Tell them big, little, you know, fast, slow, like get them so they get, and turn and read with them. Because that kindergarten readiness is things like recognizing ABCs, but it's also going left to right, which obviously is just for English. I had to learn Arabic, it goes the other way. But if you're learning to read, knowing which way to go helps, right? So I'm sure you're doing a great job. Vocabulary is a really good place to focus, though, because that's easy.
Between my wife and I, we do a lot of talking with our kids, so I think, yes, that gives me some reassurance.
That's awesome.
Hello, I'm really excited to be here tonight. A friend of mine, she's a special ed teacher for 1st and 2nd grade, and she teaches reading. And it's funny when you said, I can't wait to tell her, that when she first got to the Paramus school system in New Jersey, they didn't want to teach phonics. So she did that for a couple of years. She's like, this isn't working. So she went back to phonics, and her children started to excel. And some of the parents, they were really upset when the kids would go to the next grade. They wanted her to teach them. So I'm really going to be excited to tell her that. But the other thing is that she's now, she's got her master's, but she's specializing in, although she still wants to teach the kids, she's now doing her first semester as an adjunct professor, teaching teachers how to read. So we know that it's really important that that happens, and I just can't wait to tell her. I wish she was here tonight.
Oh, thank you, Will.
You're doing great work.
Oh, thank you, Will. As you say, watch the film. Costs $3.99. There's, if you go to the film website, it says watch the film, and there's like 4 other platforms too, but it's all about that cost.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
And listen to the podcast. It was in Apple's top 5. It's really instructive, but we know there's tons of evidence. There's books. We know. So let's use something that works. So tell her, good job.
Good job, Sonia.
And she'll love the film because the teacher in the film has to go literally under the radar. She was told she was not allowed to do anything.
Oh, that she tried that. They tried to tell her.
And then she had results in 6 weeks that they hadn't had in any other school in the district. And then they all started coming in to see what she was doing, and that was during COVID. But I can tell you, I live in Connecticut. When my oldest daughter, we moved to Connecticut, I lived in the city for 18 years, and I worked full-time and commuted, and we moved for the great schools. And the first day of first grade, my daughter's teacher, who seemed really old, but she was probably like 35, said to me, I'm gonna teach phonics. We're not allowed to, so I have to go under the radar. And I was like, what? I mean, so teachers have had, it's hard, right? Because they're handed curriculum, they're like, they're not trained to teach them. So tell her, good job, and help those teachers to be.
Yes,
to
and now
really
the
be
principal wants her to teach some of the teachers because now they're going back to phonics.
great. Awesome, thank you, thank her.
I'm actually spying the back of the info sheet that I put, and the podcast may have fell off. So I'm going to reiterate that here. It's called Sold a Story. Sold, like when you're selling something to someone.
Sold a story. It's pretty easy to find. As I say, it was Apple's top 5 for like weeks.
So I'll use the Frank connection. Steve stole the mic. I wanted to make a follow-up comment on print and interactive learning. And the fact of the matter is many of these companies have a strong need for print. I believe, although many of these companies, the edtech space, have taken market share from traditional publishers, I think overall it's been additive. The only qualification I would make is that some of the print materials that they're employing are not what I would call traditional print. And I'm responding to your query from just a few minutes ago. It's not like Janet.
Janet.
I was responding to your query. I'll repeat it again, no problem. So Janet, obviously my involvement with this segment of publishing has been because there is print. If there weren't, I would not have the same level of interest. So what I was trying to convey here is that probably it's additive. In other words, there's more print out there now, even though this group of companies are probably taking market share from larger publishers.
Yes.
But beyond that, the only observation I'll make in addition is that it may not be traditional print. It may be like a package of materials. And for the organization I used to work for, that's also attractive as well because it brings another element in assembly and skills that we can bring. But in any case, I wouldn't, what I've seen for the last 10 years, I wouldn't be worried about print going away. I think it will be around, and in fact, it will be larger in unanticipated ways.
I think it's going to be, Chuck, I think it's going to be bigger because people are understanding that the haptics of reading, the more you look at a screen, it's one-dimensional, and reading print on paper is four-dimensional. It's hearing, tasting, not tasting, hearing, seeing, tasting, and touching. And touch, what you see and touch is more relevant to the whole learning and integrating process than anything else. So what you see on a screen goes into your short-term memory, what you touch and integrate on paper goes into your long-term memory, and that has been proven over and over and over again. And if we could only teach the educators that that's the truth, we'd be way further down the road. But we're still in the let's lighten up the backpacks mode, and that's happening. Here's
Right,
the other
and I
one.
think there's a lot of data on not all screen learning is the same, right? Because as you say, if you're just looking at stuff, the data, especially for young kids, is that there's lots of rules, and this is way beyond my expertise, that it has to be interactive, that it has to be, instructional. But the good products are usually very instructional, and I think the kids do learn. But we still need books and paper for sure.
Well, we're a book and paper.
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, no, of course.
So mine is more of a comment. So many of us have been in the industry for a very long time. So, and we've talked about literacy and illiteracy for a long time. I was at a conference this summer, either July or August, and there was a panel of CEOs from the major publishers. And the moderator asked, like, what is the biggest obstacle? Like you see, what is the biggest obstacle you see, like in moving forward? And it was literacy. So I think now we do have a little bit more guns behind, like trying to move this forward. So for them to think of that as one of the top 2 obstacles, and I've never heard that before, like hopefully we have a little bit more to push this forward.
Yeah, that's amazing and horrifying.
That's horrifying.
But rewarding too, because it means we have traction.
We hope to have traction.
Right?
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
And I think I was just gonna add to what Chuck said. I, like 20 years ago or 25 years ago, saw a lot of the publishing companies struggling with what's gonna be our ed tech, electronic, digital strategy, and buying companies and companies switching around and changing curricula. And Chuck was, as he said when he did the introduction, saw it from exactly the other side. Ed tech companies, they were ed tech companies and then realized they needed a workbook or a supplemental something. So I think it just, both sides need each other, so.
Symbiotic relationship.
Yes, exactly.
Well, are we, let's see. Okay. Do we have any other okay, one more
Last
call for
question.
questions.
There's the last question right there.
That's one. Irene?
Yes.
Irene mentioned that Charlotte's Web was her formative book. What was yours?
Oh gosh, I really don't know. Oh. I mean, that was a good one. Charlotte's Web, I think, was, you know, I hate to copy it, but that's so classic, I think, in terms of the level when you sort of realize you can read, and it's about, you know, cute animals.
Yeah.
But I never like to say favorites because I hate to leave anyone else out. But Charlotte's, what was yours?
I love Charlotte's Web as well. Going back earlier, there was a book called A Bargain for Francis about a badger that I loved. Yeah, so, you know, as a emerging reader, that, and then Charlotte's Web, The Secret Garden was another one.
That's a good one. Gosh, it's hard to think back there. Thank you all so much, and thank you to Irene. She's amazing. I know you know that, she's so fun to organize this.
Thank you, Allison, for being here with us tonight and sharing your knowledge. That you are a fount of knowledge. Honestly, it has been incredible to do this program with you. Thank you all for. Yes, thank you all for coming here tonight at our event here at the New York Book Forum. If you haven't seen, we have other events for the rest of this year, and you know, to support. We're talking about literacy here today, and there are a lot of things you can do to support literacy. One of those things is we run a donation every Christmas. So that's one of the things you can do. Membership to the New York Book Forum to help us run more programs like this is also super helpful, because I have loved doing this program with Allison, and I love spreading this message about literacy, and I'm glad that you all came to listen to this tonight, and thank you for supporting us.
Membership is only $25 a year.
Oh yes, as Shannon said, membership is only $25 a year, so it's very
So
affordable,
it's very
very worth it.
NewYorkBookForum.org.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you. So great. And yeah.
This was awesome.
That's good.
There's so much information.
Well, I actually, oh, thank you, because I don't feel like I